Well, we're going to wrestle here with questions around violence in the future and what we do about it, and housing and the right to housing and public housing and the right to housing here in Baltimore City. And one of the reasons we're going to tackle this way is because there is a indigenous movement that has blown up in the city of Baltimore around housing and the right to housing and public housing and not privatizing public housing. And so people in this panel represent a spectrum of all of that. So we're going to leap into that right away, and I'm not going to keep running my mouth, so we can let these folks run their mouths instead. Here we go. So, because I have plenty to say, because I know many of these people, and none of them are shy. So Lucky's not here tonight, but we do have with us Anthony Coates, who is president of the ASME Local 647, to my left. Paul Wallace Jr. is with us, vice president of Local 617.
647.
Huh?
647 also.
647? I'll change that on the sheet, sorry. Gary Stroud is with us. Gary Stroud is a part of the tenant organizing group in the Right to Housing Alliance and a tenant council president, right? Treasurer. And Lawrence Grand Prix is with us, vice president of research at Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, right here. Seema Iyer is with us. She is chief of research and strategic planning in the city of Baltimore, current associate director of the Jacob France Institute at the University of Baltimore Merrick School of Business. Maricela Gomez is down at the end. Maricela Gomez is a public health scholar and activist. She's a physician, social justice activist, and she wrote an incredible book about housing in Baltimore that runs down the entire history of what happened here, and joins us here at the end of the studio. Good to have you with us as well. And we're also joined by Jeff Singer, who was the founder of Healthcare for the Homeless and has been an advocate around issues of the poor and housing in the city for a long time, and built that. And for somebody with his radical politics who built an institution like that is pretty amazing. He's here on the panel. And, and Jessica Lewis is with us, who's a housing organizer for Right to Housing Alliance, founding member and program developer at the Baltimore Free School, who joins us, and she's right here. So let's begin this way. One of the issues that came up on our program not long ago, when we had somebody on the show, was talking about the violence inside the housing projects and how people feeding in on themselves with this violence. So I'd like to get to the root of that for a minute. Let's just start there for a moment, and how that affects the city, how that affects this community, and where you think it comes from. Gary, why don't you start off?
Well, that's a good question, where it comes from, because everybody has different opinions. Some people believe it's the mothers being too soft on the sons. Some people believe it's the community. Some people believe it's the man. But it's in us. What we need to do is not take what's given to us. What we need to do is ask for and demand what we want. You know, don't just build a building, put some grass around it and say, hey, you got grass, you got a building. If you don't have structure in that building, you know, keeping it clean. If you don't have somebody coming in there to fix a wall when the wall breaks down, it's like getting a car. When one thing goes, other things start happening. And then all of a sudden, nobody fixing nothing, they're behind. And then you're mad and sad because you live, the only thing you can afford is this messed up place. And now the landlord's coming down on me for the money, but I had to use the money because my child got sick. What I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go out here and commit a crime. And everybody believes all the crime is coming from the public, you know, places, the poor. That's not it. It's not always coming from there. It's people coming from outside of there supplying it. Drugs, whatever, illegal activities, gambling. It's not the people that live right in there. It's always somebody from the outside coming who's doing better, coming in, you know.
And Paul, let me go to you for a moment, because you're both a leader of the union, but you grew up in the projects. You know it from both sides of the street. Your perspective.
Well, I didn't grow up in a project,
but near them, around them. You need the mic, and you hold the mic up to you.
Hello?
There you go. Yeah.
I grew up near them, and like I say, my forte was just like some of the guys say, we were on welfare, and we were doing the best that my mother could do, so my mother was my hero. I had a lot of guys coming up that were mentors and things like that to me. They didn't allow you. You couldn't even be around. You didn't even know who the numbers man was, you know, things like that. And like the ladies for Stop the Killing, every mother was concerned about every child. We are family together, black, white, Chinese, or whatever. We all a family, and we want to go home to our families. Those problems out there, like he said, we have people coming in that's actually furnishing the drugs, the negativity, and things like that, and then they furnishing those things to get rid of those places, so that now the people with the well-to-do can come in and live there. Cherry Hill once was a dump, and they put people out there. The first was the Indians, then the soldiers, and then the low-income housing people, and they saw that the chemicals and things out there wasn't hurting them. After about 40 years, now Cherry Hill is waterfront property. All these places they trying to tear up, those are empowerment zones. The Housing Authority been getting money, in the city of Baltimore getting money, billions of dollars for years and years. These places don't have no reason to be run down where we have to take a program like RAD that displaces people. We getting ready to lose McCormick. We don't have Bethlehem Steel, which used to be the largest place that employed people that reached for the stars and fell short. The process of eliminating people to get jobs, you got to have a bachelor's degree to program a computer. So if you go to school and you spend $10,000 on becoming a computer programmer or something like that, or information technology, if you don't have a bachelor's degree, you're not even going to get that job programming a simple name or social security in a computer. So there's a lot of things that's happening right there. I volunteered at Mount Royal Rec Center. I did it at Parkview Rec Center off of Fulton Avenue, and I refereed throughout the city. Everybody know me, but that's another story. But I touch these young men, like the young man said, I believe in them. I believe in them because there's a lot of people that believed in me. I've been working on my job for 27 years. And my mother and all the people in the community pushed me to be what I am. These are the same things that we have to do to these kids and things today. There's a lot of people looking in, like you say, and thinking that it don't affect them, but it does. Every time a kid goes to jail, you can't tell me that don't hurt. Every time, even one of these mothers in here crying, it took me something, I guess, getting older, because when you grow up, they tell you a man ain't supposed to be tough and things like that. So a lot of times I cry in the morning, going to work, listen to the gospel and stuff like that. But it took me something over there to not cry about her son being killed, because I probably knew her son playing basketball and things of that nature. And till we together get with the people that we put in charge, like police officers said, and make them do their job. They sitting over there, and we right over City Hall, and we got one council person over here that's a young man that see what's going on. We got a request for them to be over here, but they want our vote. The hell with them. I'm sorry. I don't care nothing about them. I mean, Jack Young, he's around. Everybody love Jack because Jack is out in the community. Mary Pat Clark and a few other people that ain't know who they are, but the rest of them, you don't even know who they are. Who are they? Who are the council people? But when you say that, these guys want to work. They want to work. They talk to me every day. One guy had a job in Cherry Hill, and he was so happy that he didn't have to sell drugs no more. And he passed the urine test and everything. And when he went to go to work, they said he had a small felony warrant or something on there, and that was it. But on paper, he was employed or was given the opportunity to apply for a job. But that don't work. Now, what do? You force them right back out there into that. Like I was telling them in the conference we had, I'm scared. When my mother said she brought me in here and she'll take me out of here.
So, Paul,
and that's the day.
Let me kind of let other folks jump in here for a moment. And I think that a good place to take this right now, there are two places to go. Let's start with one. One is, how does it change? What is the movement building that's going to change what we are, and how do we envision that change? And I know you're on the ground every day organizing people on right to housing, but let's talk about what we see as a change and how it can happen in one sense, but what do we see? What is it? What do we want and how do we get there? Let me go to you first, Jessica, because you're part of the organizers of the Right to Housing Alliance.
Okay, so we're talking about public housing now?
We're talking about housing, period. In other words, we have a problem in the city. We have a city that has 40,000 boarded up houses. We have, how many people is it, Jeff Singer, that are in danger of becoming homeless or housing insecure? What's that number?
86,781 families in Baltimore have incomes below $25,000 a year, can't afford their housing, and about 15,000 a year become homeless.
So that is both the basis of a revolution and the basis of organizing and all the basis of crisis. So that's what we're talking about. It's more than public housing. It's no housing.
Well, to set the recent privatization plan by HUD in a context, we live in a city where there were 156,000 failure to pay rent cases in Baltimore City District Court last year, which resulted in over 7,000 rental evictions. We also have this really staggering number, which is over 50%. I think 53% of renting households are what's called housing cost burdened or shelter cost burdened, which means that they're paying more than 30% of their income to afford housing, which means their costs being put off there. It affects, more than just their ability to afford housing. It affects their ability to afford health care, to afford education, transportation, food, any other things you can think of that we all kind of need in our lives. There were over 4,200 foreclosures in Baltimore City last year. I mean, and when we talk about this RAD program, that's just one more thing that's going to contribute to this already mounting crisis, where people are sort of threatened every month with living on the streets. This is, sometimes 1,000 cases a day, eviction cases going through district court, and that's a really precarious situation. And this RAD program, while not immediately having a displacement effect, is just one, adding to the burden down the road of, adding right now over 4,000 units are affected by the RAD program, but, those are 4,000 people who are also going to be struggling to look for affordable housing in the future when these companies decide that they want to change the format of these buildings that they now own. Another reason this is really pulling off of our available affordable housing is low-income housing tax credits. These are a fixed pool of tax credits these companies are going to be applying for, resulting in fewer total units possible. So I just wanted to kind of sit this in a context of this isn't just a matter of, everyone's going to get vouchers, it's going to work out fine for residents. People are already, even without this public housing, privatization plan, people are already really struggling to make their housing needs met. And to stay off the streets. So
just for the audience here and the audience around Baltimore and the country and the world who don't know what this is, but RAD stands for?
It's Rental Assistance Demonstration. It's a HUD pilot program that Baltimore City has applied for and has been approved for and is planning to sell 22 public housing high-rises to private developers over the next 2 years.
This is something it was started in the last administration. The Obama administration took it up and pushed it and made it a reality. And it is, in many ways, as Jeff Singer has said on my program many times, and you can say it again, this is one of the nails in the coffin of public housing in the United States of America. Lawrence.
On the concept of RAD, I wanted to echo the sentiment of one of my fellow panelists in that there's no reason why we should have such a huge funding deficit in terms of, I believe, $800 million for deficit for public housing. But I frame that through the work of UC Irvine Professor David Goldberg, who talks about neoliberalism, this move towards market-based thinking, being fundamentally tied to racism, and what's in the context of my work with Leads a Beautiful Struggle, anti-blackness. So we have this huge deficit in funding, but we just naturalize it because we have a coded language where taxpayer is coded as white and deserving of resources, and recipient of social services is coded as black, and therefore you're lucky to get what you get, right? So we justify the continual underfunding of things like public housing through a framework that appears strictly economic, but it's fundamentally racialized through the history of America. So quick follow-up to that. When we're thinking about RAD, I had a housing proposal that I did through LBS that tried to take the words of people I was hearing seriously, which is we have so many vacant houses, why can't we put homeless people in the vacant houses, right? I forget the source, but online they say it's because federal funding means you have to have someone to oversee that, which means that's hard. I counter by saying that the city owns a ton of vacant homes themselves, which gives them flexibility outside of that framework. So my proposal focused on sweat equity, which means that they have pilot programs in DC that if you do the work, you rehab the apartment in DC, you get to live there, right? So I just expanded that to Baltimore that says, if you're homeless, instead of you having to pay all this money in emergency services, if you do the work and get trained to rehab the home, you should get to live there. Yes. Because people want to work. People don't want handouts. Rights are not given, they are innate, and we need to recognize those rights. And last thing I'll say quickly, you could start the program with the homeless because that's the most cost savings. They're already doing this in other cities, giving them apartments. But I say let them work to own the home themselves because through their tax dollars, they own that home if the city has bought it, right? So how do you have the framework to make that successful? You also extend the program to nonprofits. So you get to decrease their housing costs, which means they can allocate more money to do services, and they get the training to rehab homes as well.
So if the camera can take a quick shot just of Jeff Singer, what he's holding up there is vacants, equal potential housing for the homeless. So let me turn to Seema Iyer for a moment and talk about why you think there is such a gap in some ways between people's desires to change what housing is in Baltimore and other cities and what happens inside government.
So first let me just say that I think the point that we spend so little money on housing at a federal and local level is something that we as taxpayers need to really focus in on. It's pretty clear that if you're not adequately housed, and we do have a lot of people that are house burdened and maybe not necessarily homeless yet, but could potentially be, if you're not adequately housed, it's very hard for you to sustain a job, right? If you don't have a permanent place to live, you won't find permanent employment. Very clear evidence on that. Very clear evidence that poor housing leads to poor health outcomes. Very hard to maintain a healthy lifestyle if you don't have a place to live. And then finally, for the children that are not adequately housed, it's very hard for them to get adequate education. If they're constantly moving around and they're constantly moving schools, very hard for, so if we care about education, if we care about health care, if we care about employment, we need to make sure that we have adequate housing. And quite frankly, from a neighborhood perspective, having adequate housing for everybody in your neighborhood only helps your own house, right? If the house next door to you is maintained, it's going to be helpful to you as well. And so housing in some ways is kind of a community builder if we treat it that way. The city of Baltimore has a very long history, which I know Marcella is a very good person to talk more about that. But the public housing in the city of Baltimore, starting in the 1960s, those towers were possibly, not the best housing situation to begin with. But now we have the legacy effects of those towers that we're all having to deal with, not only living in them, but now what you do with it to maintain it. The RAD is potentially a way to deal with that maintenance of these projects that are now kind of outliving their lifespan. But I do think that we need to make sure that we advocate for better housing for everyone. We advocate for better police, we advocate for better education, but at the crux of that is better housing, and it affects all of us.
So Maricela, your name was called out. Let me turn to you next.
Yeah. I'd like to connect the housing back to violence. Someone mentioned it's that violence is a health issue, and indeed it is, but we've sort of glossed over that and made it a criminal issue. There's some recent data that showed that when families pay more than 30%, so we've always been saying we shouldn't pay more than 30% of income for rental or mortgage for housing, but now we have data, we have evidence that shows that when a family pays more than 30% of their income into housing, especially low-income families who are paying sometimes anywhere from 70 to 80% of their income toward housing, that the children suffer. And the children suffer specifically in cognitive ability. What does that mean? That means that they're not getting the resources put into their education. They're not getting the resources put into after-school program. And so how does this continue to contribute to violence? So what we've been doing over 80, 90 years, because this is not new, right? This continued deprivation of our low-income and of color communities is a fundamental history that this country is built upon. So we're just reaping those seeds now. But what happens is that when children are not allowed to develop cognitively, to be competitive in the workplace, these same children then will find other ways to make an income. And see, we have this cycle of violence, right? Because we're going to look for ways to be a man or to take care of our families, or we're going to look for ways to bring income into our households, right? So housing has this real direct impact. Not only do we not allow families because of not having sufficient affordable housing, but we're perpetuating this steady decline in our communities. And it's not just any communities. I mean, this is all about race and class. And the minute that we forget that we live this history of slavery and Jim Crow and the class dynamic that was so interwoven with it that we can't even seem to pull it apart anymore. The minute we forget this, we're not finding the solutions that we need to go forward with. So what do? Specific to the housing, we've been having a disparate numbering with the affordable housing and people who can't afford to live in housing. And this isn't new. This has been going on for years since we started looking at the data of how many people are low income and can afford house and how many affordability or affordable housing are available. Since we've been counting the numbers, we've been aware of this, and yet we haven't done anything about it. We've not caught up. So we continue to have this difference in people living in low income and poverty and the amount of housing that they can afford to live in. So as a policy recommendation for the city of Baltimore, and it's not new, this is being done, this has been proposed for 10, 15 years now, that we do a real analysis of the amount of affordable housing that we have available in this city and match it with the low-income people who need affordable housing. And you know what we'll find. We'll find that there's a difference. We'll find that there are too many people living in poverty and too many low-income people, and there's not enough affordable units available for them. But we don't do that data. We don't do that analysis. Why? Because we don't care. Because we have politicians in government who don't care. And I'm saying this very bluntly, because if we cared, we wouldn't be in the predicament we're in. So we have politicians who don't care about folks of color, and we have politicians who don't care about low-income people. And some of us know those politicians, and so we don't want to talk about it. But we have to start talking about it. And some of the talk can be supported by the data. And so we need to hold HABC, and we need to hold this mayor and this current governor who's led us into this mess, right? And hasn't shown us a solution, but has talked about there being a solution. And we need to demand that we look at outcomes of how many affordable units are there, how many people need housing, and what are we going to do to bring those two numbers together so people who are low income can find housing that they can afford to be in without spending 60 and 70 or 80% of their income paying for housing. That's just unacceptable in America in 2014, y'all. It's just, there's just no, we've become dull and numb to inequality. Is it because we've seen it so often? I don't know. I see it every day in my adult life, but I'm not happy with it. And so I challenge all of y'all today on the personal level to become unhappy with inequality, all right? Let it get down.
We have about 5 minutes after this panel before we turn to the audience, so let me do this real fast. A couple people have not spoken. I'd like to just ask a quick question to pull out, because we're here at Real News, and our program is also moving inside this building. So the question is, for us, I think, is what is it that media can do, that TV and radio can do, to open this up and explode it in the city? What is that's needed? What do you think we should do Tony, I didn't introduce you because you weren't on the list, but you're sitting here, Tony Simmons. But Tony, very quickly, let me go to Tony, very quickly go, because we have not heard from Jeff, and then back here, and as we conclude this. Tony?
The one thing that we, Real News and other networks can do is hold people accountable, expose what's going on out there. I have never seen a businessman who's going to take over the private housing and not want to make a profit. This is news. You're going to have Sun Papers and other news organizations try to cover it up because they're part of the problem. They're not part of the solution. Independent news will broadcast the news. And one thing you cannot change is the news. It is what it is. It's reality. You cannot change it. You can't rewrite it. It is what it is. And we need desperately in Baltimore to have a real news network, an independent, extra set of eyes to hold our city council, our mayor, especially her, hold her accountable for the destruction of the city. When I came to Baltimore back in the 60s, I'm from Jamestown, South Carolina, population of about 20 people. Baltimore was beautiful. It was a city of little small communities everywhere. Remember, everybody used to have pride. I remember when my little brother came home, we had 2 jobs. We had to change our school clothes, get that bucket, and wash them steps. We used to have the little flower pots out in front. You grew your flower plot, your plants out there. Your mother used to come out the door and do a head nod to the neighbor. That means, I'm going to go to work. Would you watch my children for me? We have lost community. And one thing that Real News Network and other independent news stations can do is bring awareness to the problem. Keep the focus on the problem. Keep people accountable to what they are doing. We cannot let our city be controlled by that 1%ers. We cannot keep letting our neighborhoods fall apart while we spend billions of dollars at the inner harbor. And I don't know about anybody in this room. I can't afford to live down there.
So Tony, let me just, because we're running short on time, so let me just very quickly ask the other panelists I called on to have quick thoughts about what can happen. Jeff, Jessica, and you can have a closing thought, very quick closing thought. I know it's hard for you, but Jeff, go ahead, let me start.
Very quickly, yes. I want to supplement some of what we've heard. For example, there's $800 million of rehab need in public housing. Just recently, the city gave $400 million to a rich white guy to build on Harbor Point. So the racist issues of no money for public housing and lots of money for white people who wear suits and beg at City Hall. Now, you know, when poor homeless folks beg downtown, they get arrested. Yep. When the rich white people beg, they get money. So this is an issue that we really need to focus on. I'd also like to say that bringing Baltimore to the brink is an interesting dialectic. On the one hand, the brink of disaster, violence and crime, poverty, income inequality. People who live in Sandtown, Winchester live 20 years less than people who live in Roland Park. People who live on Ruxton Avenue in West Baltimore live 20 years less than people who live on Ruxton Road in Towson, just by accident of birth. So yes, these income inequality issues, these issues of racism and poverty, we can address them. But the other side of the brink of disaster...
Jeff, sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
Tremendous rant. Keep that card away from your microphone.
Okay. Well, this is the really important part of the card. Yeah. The other side, the thesis is that we're on the brink of disaster. But the antithesis is we're on the brink of real social change. Yeah. And the organizing that's going around here on RAD and the Right to Housing Alliance and the Leaders for a Beautiful Struggle and Housing Our Neighbors and Word on the Street and the Homeless Speakers Bureau, the organizing that's happening in Baltimore is very exciting. And it's going to bring the thesis and the antithesis to the synthesis. And the synthesis is a new economy and a new politics and real democracy.
Amen.
Program in particular does, and what it'll do to the future of public housing, is that it'll put a public good in the hands of private companies whose interest is in making a profit. And we see, you know, Right to Housing Alliance, mostly working with out-of-pocket tenants, has seen the perfect, you know, sort of perfect example of this with a mid-sized property manager Sage Management, who really relies really heavily on getting these high subsidy sort of Section 8 vouchers, tenants into their properties, and then also engages in a fee training scheme that leaves all of them in this cycle of like crippling debt month after month after month that they can never get out of. And that's the kind of culture that privatizing our basic needs creates. That's the culture that this kind of project, this trend toward privatizing everything, toward pushing everything toward being profit driven, and privatizing our basic needs is violent. An eviction is a violent action. Living in substandard conditions when landlords have the money to make repairs is a violent act. And we're putting our public housing, this last sort of hope for 4,000 people so far in the pilot session of RAD. We're putting them in that situation to be victimized by these perpetrators of violence who are people who use housing to make a profit.
Very quick looking thought. And Coates.
Okay, I've made several attempts to contact different medias, and thank God for you guys, Real News and Network and everything. And I would like to, have opportunity to sit down with the commissioner where we can actually talk with the tenants, the workers, and resolve some issues right here in public. Put things down on paper and make agreements. Instead of having these media wars, where I'm not present, the commissioner's not present, and these things are being said about one another, and the other party's not solving any problems. We need to save time and money and sit down and resolve these issues like he said he would, and like I said, I'm willing to do, and fix it. 'Cause I believe there's nothing that can't be fixed. Jobs are important, and people stand a chance to lose their employment, making them homeless, and revisiting Jeff. And I've talked to the mayor recently about a couple grievances and things that I filed, and she had made recommendations for the commissioner for HCD, which is a different entity from HABC, to look over these things. And I went, what she doesn't realize, I had went to this commissioner before. She told me it wasn't under her jurisdiction for HABC to intervene. And I'd just like to have the commissioner here. We could sit down in front of the public and get rid of all the mystery.
Well, thank you, panel. And we're going to turn this over now to Jessica and Mike.